Well, the Big 12 has a new narrative problem on its hands, and it's actually coming from the one place we thought the Big 12 would always be fine. Welcome into the channel. I am John Kurtz. Here on this channel, I talk college football, college basketball, and most importantly, conference realignment, all from a Big 12 perspective. Please consider subscribing if you have not. Live shows on Wednesdays and Sundays are a blast. Make sure you get in there for those on Wednesday and Sunday nights. People from all over the college football world. It is a great time. So subscribe. Make sure you know when it is that those are happening. Please like the video and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. How big of a deal is it that the Big 12 has this new narrative problem? Okay, it is about something that we felt like was just a given. The Big 12 would always have this, right? Falling behind in football to the Big 10 and the SEC anyway, but what do we say about the Big 12? It's the best basketball conference around. It is a league that's basketball cannot be questioned. With Kansas and Houston and Baylor, Arizona on the way, there are basketball brands all over the place, and a whole tier, like second tier of Big 12 schools like Iowa State, Texas Tech, K-State, that all have had lots of success and high-level moments in college basketball in the last 10 to 15 years. It was hard to come after the league, but now we sit here on the eve of the Final Four, or at least on the eve of the Elite Eight finishing and turning into the Final Four. And the Big 12 not only has nobody in the Final Four, but there was nobody in the Elite Eight. For the first time since 2015, the league failed to land anybody in the Elite Eight. There were only two schools in the Sweet 16. That is a problem for a league that not only claimed very loudly to be the best basketball league in the country, but also took a lot of crap from the ACC in a narrative battle about gaming the net. And there was a lot of back and forth about if the Big 12 did game the system to make the league seem better than it actually was. And now all of that seems vindicated, seems justified, even if the point wasn't exactly true. The end result was, hey, the Big 12's overrated. And now it looks like that here at the end of the year. I do think there is somewhat of an issue here because the Big 12, a huge part of what Brett Yormark is trying to do with the league is to separate the basketball TV rights eventually from the football TV rights. There's at least been a lot of rumor about that and a lot of talk about that, decoupling the basketball rights being the proper term there. And if you want to do that and make your basketball as valuable as possible, you would want to clearly have the best basketball conference out there. But let's look at what has happened here, okay? The Big 12 took some real lumps in the NCAA tournament. Now, I should throw in this caveat. Yes, Houston, I will absolve from some of the blame here because losing Jamal Shead, if you go listen to Kelvin Sampson, and you should, what he said after the game about Shead, like that, I mean, there's no other Jamal, in his words, that they could turn to. That was a backbreaker. And I happen to think that they probably do beat Duke, if not for that, and would have got a chance to play NC State to go to the Final Four. But there was some bad luck there for sure, and Houston was just a bad luck team with injuries all season long. Otherwise, they very well could have been a team that played for the national championship. Hard to say a national champ with UConn, and more on that in a moment. But that still is something the Big 12 should have still had somebody else in the Elite Eights. You know, I mean, you only had two teams in the Sweet 16, Houston being one of them. You caught a bad break, and Iowa State could not beat Illinois, who then went on to give up a 30-0 run to UConn and just get absolutely waxed in the next round. And I mentioned that narrative was out there. Brad Brownell, if you recall, he said this back a couple of months ago. A couple things that folks don't understand. You can manipulate the net, and there's a strength of schedule dynamic where the Big 12 has managed it with their scheduling. Their non-conference scheduling, they're playing 300-level teams and winning by 40 and 50 points to increase their offensive and defensive efficiency numbers, which is a big part of the net. So that's why you see teams trying to win at the end of games by 30 or 40 instead of just putting in your walk-ons. So the Big 12, they're playing 8 non-conference games, 7 non-conference games against low-level teams and increasing their net. Then when they all get into the league, their totals are higher, their net rankings are higher, and so their teams are perceived to be better than they are. Joe Lunardi, of all people, actually stood up for the Big 12 in all of this and laid out some of the facts and said, hey, there's 7 teams in the Big 12 with non-con schedule rankings worse than 300. Those 7 teams played 32 games against the bottom 100 teams in D1 basketball. The expected margin of victory in those games would be, on average, 28.8 points per game. The actual margin of victory in those games was 32.6 points per game. 5 of those games, 3 from Iowa State, 2 from BYU, resulted in a 50-plus point spread. If you take those outliers out, the average margin of victory drops to 28.4, which is basically the as-expected outcome. and the net doesn't exclude the extreme blowouts, nor should it. But Lenardi said gaming the system went out with the RPI, which measured who you played way more than how you played. Net is a vast improvement, and it actually tracks quite well with other respected ranking systems. It is also designed to measure teams, not conferences. Okay, so Lenardi tried to stick up for it a little bit, and it kind of dispelled some of that narrative, like, hey, there were really only 5 games that actually happened with only 2 different teams of the instances that you're talking about, Brad Brownell, but still, the committee seemed to listen to that narrative because Iowa State, instead of being a number 1 seed, which was being argued for by a lot of national pundits, they were only the number 8 overall seed. They were the bottom 2 seed. Texas Tech was a 6. Oklahoma got left out of the field. K-State was not in the first 4 out. I think if the Big 12 had this overwhelming respect as the best basketball conference out there, like it was preaching, Iowa State probably is a 1 seed or certainly the highest 2. Texas Tech's probably a 5. Oklahoma's in the field. K-State would have at least been close to the NCAA tournament field, and instead none of that happened. And then in the tournament, nobody in the Elite 8, 2 in the Sweet 16. Iowa State doesn't play to seed after romping through the Big 12 tournament. Kansas gets absolutely destroyed by Gonzaga, a team that not that long ago was considered to be just on the bubble. Baylor lost to the very guy who made those complaints, Brad Brownell. Baylor didn't make the second weekend, and they lost to that guy who was complaining about all of it. That's about as bad as it could possibly get. Texas Tech got bounced by an ACC team in the first round, and that ACC team, by the way, is in the Final Four, came from the conference of Brad Brownell, the conference that was complaining. TCU got beat pretty soundly by Utah State in the first round, who then they turned around and got housed after that. And then Arizona, who's coming into the league next year and supposed to provide some extra firepower for this league, they continued their recent trend of being one of the most disappointing high-level teams in the tournament. They've now lost as a 1 or a 2 seed the last 3 years to a 5, a 6, and a 15. Then Brad Brownell makes the Elite 8. NC State gets to the Final Four. There were 4 ACC teams in the Sweet 16, 3 in the Elite 8. Like, all of that happened. All of that happened. And it kind of backs up this narrative of, well, the Big 12 was overrated this year. On top of that, what we're likely headed toward, now, I guess don't count your chickens before they hatch, but what it looks like we're headed toward is UConn winning the national championship again and doing so in dominant fashion because nobody can seem to touch them at all. A 30-0 run is ridiculous. And they just put that on a 3 seed, one of the top 10 teams in the country in Illinois. If they win back-to-back titles, you're going to be looking at it saying, well, hey, no longer is this, well, the Big 12 has 3 of the last 4 teams to play for national titles and 2 champions. It's going to be UConn as the dominant force in the sport, and they play in a league that fancies itself about as good as the Big 12 and the Big East. And then the ACC just jumped up and had this incredible postseason and kind of lends some credibility to, hey, you may actually be a little bit overrated. And then your big new entry to the conference in Arizona reinforced the narrative that Arizona might be a little overrated because they're always losing in the tournament or too early. You know, none of this really helps. And it is a big deal to try and create as much of a grip on that narrative as you can. Like, hey, we are the SEC of basketball. We are to basketball what the SEC is to football. And you definitely don't have as much of a grip on that as what the SEC does with years of brand equity built up in that narrative for football. Got to try and keep it as much as you can for basketball to allow Yormark to work his magic the best he can, which would be getting you some extra money because of your hoops. That's an ultimate goal for the conference, something that hopefully is attainable. And I'm not saying that 1 year like this is going to knock it all down, but especially the UConn piece, man. I mean, that really could. UConn dominating, Kansas falling back a little bit the last 2 years and getting blown out the way that they did in the tournament this year. You know, perception problem at the top. That can be an issue. So the Big 12 needs to get things back on track next year. And the best thing they can do is just perform in the NCAA tournament. Right or wrong, fair or unfair, that's how this league is going to be measured. And right now, basketball seems to be slipping just a bit. We'll continue to monitor it. I don't think it's anything to panic about, but it is definitely on my radar. As far as long-term goals for this league, something they need to at least be paying attention to. Again, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit up the shows on Wednesday and Sunday. If you could like the video, I'd appreciate it. And let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this is a big deal? Is it not a very big deal at all? If you're an ACC fan, Tell us how much the Big 12 sucks. All of it in the comments. I appreciate it. Bring it in there and like the video. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you would like to contribute to the channel that way. And I will talk to you guys all soon.